Greetings and God bless. I'm Anthony Presley, and we're continuing in our series on the book of Daniel. Today we're covering Daniel chapter 7, an extremely important chapter in terms of understanding future prophetic events. This is one of the most prophetic chapters in the Bible. It tells us things that are coming. So this is the study of eschatology, which is the end times, the study of the end of the age as we know it. And Daniel, he was given a vision that told us what the empires were that are coming in order. And he was given this hundreds of years before many of them would come. This particular chapter was given to Daniel. It's not exactly in order. This is Daniel chapter 7, but it happened between Daniel chapter 4 and chapter 5, where Daniel chapter 4 was the Nebuchadnezzar, and that's the vision of him becoming a tree stump, losing his kingdom for 7 years. It represented Babylon and the final 7 years in which Babylon will take care over the world on this last week called the tribulation period, or the final week. It represented that it was happening, Daniel chapter 4, earlier in Daniel's lifetime. Then Daniel chapter 5, we see Nebuchadnezzar's grandson is now the king. He's not the same kind of king as Nebuchadnezzar, and Babylon is overthrown, and the Medes and the Persians come in. Well, before that happened, Daniel dreamed about all of it. He saw the Babylonians, represented here in Daniel chapter 7. Then he saw what would be the next empire that would come in, which is the Persians, and we'll see that as the second empire in his vision. But then he goes on and sees a third and a fourth empire, and it brings us all the way literally to the end of the world. So let's dive in, because this is some important, heavy information that we can jump into. Daniel chapter 7. Starting at verse 4, I'm going to dive directly into the vision that Daniel had and what each thing means and why it's important for us to have an understanding of that. Daniel chapter 7, verse 4, the first was like a lion. So he sees 4 great beasts coming out of the Mediterranean Sea, the Great Sea, which is just letting you know the area, the territory around the Mediterranean area. So you'll notice that all these countries are in that area, the area around Israel. And it says the first one was like a lion and had eagle's wings. And I beheld until the wings thereof were plucked up, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Now, this first one we know is Babylon. This first image, this first beast that he sees that comes out of the sea is Babylon. Now, it's represented by a winged lion, which is actually the representation of Babylon. Babylon had several creatures and different things that represented them, but one of the major things that you can see what Babylon is historically is a winged lion. They even have winged lions on their gates. Some winged lions actually survived, and we were able to see them in history and get pictures of them, that they represented Babylon. But the reason that this was a lion is because, one, the lion is considered the most powerful beast, and Babylon was the head of gold in the original image. It was the great empire of strength, spiritual understanding. A lot of it was not as paganistic spiritually, but it was still great spiritual understanding with the Chaldeans. God considered them the greatest empire. God said the next empire that comes after you will be inferior to you, which is why in Daniel chapter 2, the next empire that came was silver, but the first one was gold. That was the lion. Now keep in mind, the empires are always synonymous with their leaders. Oftentimes they're synonymous with their leaders, meaning it could be talking about Babylon itself or Nebuchadnezzar. In this case, we see Babylon being represented by a lion, but it says the lion was made to stand up, was given feet as a man. This is a reference to what happened in Daniel chapter 4, when it says a man's heart was given to the king. So the king had lost his mind for 7 years. God took his kingdom and his understanding away from himself for 7 years. It says at the end of 7 years, I'll give you a man's heart back. I will restore you back to your understanding. And that's what that symbolism that we're seeing here. The lion was lifted up. It had wings. It had eagle's wings, but the wings were taken away, and he was made to stand up like a man. It was representing both Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. Continuing on. Verse 5, it says, and behold, another beast, a second like unto a bear. And it raised itself up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth and between its teeth. And they said unto it, arise, devour much flesh. Now this one is the Medes and the Persians, particularly the Persians, which is why it says it's raised up on one side. Medes and Persians. See, the Persian emperor comes in, Xerxes, and it originally was Darius, actually. And Darius had a mother and a father. One was a Mede, one was Persian. So he was able to bring those two sides together as one major empire, and that was called the Medes and the Persians. But the Persians end up being the strong empire. Matter of fact, at some point they do away with the Medes, the Median power, I should say. And so Persians, it says it's raised up on one side. It's saying the Persian side will be strong. It also says that it had three ribs in its mouth. The three ribs that are in its mouth represented three areas that were overthrown. Babylon, Egypt, and Libya were all overthrown by the Persians. And so again, this was a prophetic implication as what was to come. It had not yet come yet when this was written, but for us, it's in hindsight. Verse 6 says, and after this, behold, I beheld, and lo, another like unto a leopard, which had upon his back 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So now we have a leopard. Now this leopard represents, again, an empire, 2 empires now in the future from when this was given to Daniel. And this was the Grecian Empire. It represents, the leopard represents the Greeks, and it represents their leader, which is Alexander the Great. We've heard about him a lot in history, but he's represented by a leopard because of how quickly Alexander the Great was going to take over the world. It was phenomenal. He literally took over the entire known world by the time he was 29 years old. Before he was 30, he had conquered the world. He ends up conquering this great Persian empire that has hundreds of thousands of troops by sending to battle 30,000 men. 30,000 men somehow are able to conquer and chase down hundreds of thousands of Persians. Alexander the Great was an amazing, brilliant war tactician, and he was able to conquer the world quickly. So it is represented by a leopard. It's represented by a leopard with wings, however. It talks about 4 wings here because, or in this case, I'm sorry, it says 4 wings and 4 heads because at the end of his kingdom will be split up among his 4 generals. This is going to be very important on our next session on Daniel chapter 8, because from those 4 generals, we'll find out that it's going to get specific as to where the Antichrist will come from. This next chapter is where we're going to be able to find out exactly the territory in which the Antichrist, this man of sin that the New Testament refers to, this future world dictator who will take over the world for the last 7 years that this world is in existence under man's rulership, will be ruled by this man who will be controlled and powered by Satan. His name is the Antichrist, and details about him and where he comes from are more specifically given in Daniel chapter 8. However, we're going to see him alluded to quite a bit right here in Daniel chapter 7. And first, I need you to understand that he's going to come. We're going to be able to narrow down the territory he comes from both the Greek territory and, in this chapter, the Roman territory. In the 2 chapters, 7 and 8, we're going to see that it narrows down where the Antichrist comes from based on 2 different territories, meaning he's not specifically coming from one of those entire territories, but a region that both of those territories shared. The Greeks had a certain place, the Romans had a certain place. Most of those places overlapped. There is an overlapping place where both of those shared that the Antichrist will come from, which is why in Daniel chapter 7, you see the little horn, which is the Antichrist, that is going to arise out of the 4th beast. He's going to come from the Roman territory. But when we get to the next chapter, it's going to go up one and say, this is where he comes from if we were looking at it from the Grecian territory. And from the Grecian territory, it would be here, one of these 4 wings that we'll get to next chapter. All right, and then continue on, it says in verse 7, and I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and he had great iron teeth, and he devoured and brake into pieces, and stamped the residue and the feet thereof, and he was diverse in all the beasts that had come from before him, and he had 10 horns. So this beast is a non-descriptive beast. This beast blows people's minds a whole lot, because for the first 3, they had imagery: a lion, a leopard, a bear. And there's another thing I want to make sure that we're understanding. The Bible translates itself. When we get to the book of Revelation, one of those books that a lot of people are afraid of, there's so much symbolism, dragons and all kinds of things, you'll be able to find that you can use the book of Daniel, especially, and some other books, as a key to unlock the symbolism that's in Revelation. Here is one of the major keys. When you get to Revelation 13, it's going to talk about this final world empire, this final beast, this eighth beast is what it calls it, because it goes back futuristic before Daniel, and it picks up Egypt and Assyria. Then it starts with Daniel with Babylon, and then Grecians, and then Persians, then the Grecians, then Rome, and then it brings in two more that are to come in the future. Where it says this eighth one, and then it goes on and describes it, it says it has the body of a leopard, the mouth of a lion, and feet of a bear. What in the world is that? What it is a combination of the territories that were found here in Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 reveals what the future is talking about. Many scholars will tell you the Old Testament concealed is the New Testament revealed. The Old Testament hides it until you get the key to unlock it in the New Testament. And the New Testament fully explains it. So the future empire that the Antichrist will control will be a combination of all three of these territories. The Grecian Empire, the Roman Empire is going to be part of it as well. But as far as that body, it's the Grecian Empire, the mouth is the lion, the Babylonian Empire, the feet are the Persians, the bear. So this entire area around the Mediterranean Sea is going to be one major headquarters, one Kabul that the Antichrist is going to put together as a major warring standpoint, a major foothold, and a major territory. Keep in mind also, 99% of these territories that I'm talking about are Muslim countries. This is going to be important. We'll get more into that in the next session, Daniel chapter 8. So again, this fourth beast is non-descriptive, yet it tells you things about it. For example, that it has mouths of iron. Well, remember in Daniel chapter 2, the image that we saw, the feet had iron. And the feet, it was iron, and the toes were iron of clay, and there were 10 toes. Well, here we're going to see 10 horns are going to come from this beast. All of this represents the same thing. 10 kings are the horns or the toes. 10 kings are going to arise out of this fourth beast. The fourth beast is Rome. So from Rome, there's going to be a breakup where 10 territories are going to arise. And of those 10 kings, at the end of days, one small horn will arise after them, pluck up 3 of them, meaning he's going to overthrow 3 of them, take over the world, and become the final Antichrist. This is what the Bible is saying when it talks about the horns. Let me show you what it talks about when it says the little horn or this Antichrist, how it describes him. In verse 8, it says, I considered the horn, and behold, there came up another before among them, a little horn, whereas the 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes, the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. And I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the ancients of days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was pure like the wool, and his throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels were of burning fire. And it goes on to describe many great things about our God. Verse 7, go simply down to verse 17. It says, these great beasts, which are 4 kings, this is the explanation, are 4 kings which shall arise out of the earth. So here the angel is describing to Daniel what's happening. He says, but the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom of God. Remember I said everything is a war of kingdoms. This is never about just what it is on the surface level, but this is a war of kingdoms. And the saints shall possess this kingdom forever and ever. Jesus came and brought a kingdom spiritually. He's going to come back in the second coming and bring a kingdom physically. But spiritually, he brought this kingdom during the rule of Rome, during the major time of this fourth beast, the rule of Rome, which the Bible shows us is what stops Rome from continuing until the end of days. There is a gap. We're going to find from Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapter 11, there is a gap. There is what's called a 70-week prophecy. We haven't gotten to that yet, but it was a week of years. We'll get into this later. But what it is 69 of those weeks of years, which is 483 years, have passed. Then there came Jesus. He literally, Daniel was given a countdown to the day in which Jesus would be prepared to be killed on the cross. And then from there, there's a gap, a time period where it shifted from the being about the Jews to being about the Gentiles. And during that time period, we don't know how long it is. There's a gap until that last week, that last 7 years. When that last 7 years begins is the Antichrist's territory. And that's when Rome picks back up. And somewhere in these 10 kings that have something to do with the Roman Empire are going to give their authority over to this one man, this little horn, who's going to have control over the entire territory that ancient Rome had, that Greece had, that the Babylons had, that the Persians had, which is that area around the Mediterranean Sea, which is currently, they couldn't have predicted this then, but it's currently almost all exclusively Muslim territory. This is important for understanding what is to come, because what is to come is coming very soon. This is Daniel chapter 7. It speaks about what is coming still in the near future, the 7-year tribulation that will come, where this little horn that speaks blasphemous things, this evil man who comes in the name of peace, but puts the world into war and controls the world for the last 7 years, particularly the last 3.5 of the last 7 years. He is the Antichrist. Just to give you confirmation that the little horn is the Antichrist, here's just a couple of things that you can see that from the book of Revelation, when the book of Revelation is describing the Antichrist, how it matches with the little horn. Both of them become conquerors, Daniel chapter 7 and Revelation 6. Both of them speak blasphemies against God, Daniel 7 and 8, Revelations 13 and 5. Both will prevail against the saints for a certain time, Daniel 7, Revelations 13. Both will have 10 horns or 10 kings under their control, Daniel chapter 7, verse 20 through 25, Revelation 13:1, and Revelation 17:12 through 14. Both will arise after the 10 kings, Daniel 7, 7 and 8, Revelations 13, 1 through 7, and 17, 12 through 17. Both will change times and laws, Daniel 7:11, Daniel 7:21 through 27, and Revelations 13, 1 through 7. Both will rule with 10 kings until the Lord returns. Daniel 2, 44, 45, Daniel 7, verses 8 through 11, Revelation 17, verses 12 through 14, Revelation 19, verses 11 through 21. Both will have power for 42 months. 3.5 years is the primary crux of the Antichrist's power. He's going to have some sort of power for 7 years, but the last 3.5, he's going to control the world. And that's Daniel chapter 12, verses 7, Revelations chapter 12, verse 14. There's many, many, many more things. It lines up perfectly with this little horn that we see in Daniel chapter 7 is the Antichrist of the book of Revelation. And as we study this more, we can get an understanding as to what's to come and what to expect. Jesus said, be prepared, understand the signs of the times. He said, how can you know when it's going to rain and whether or not it's going to be a good day based on the weather patterns, and yet you can't tell what's going on in the spiritual, and the spiritual is more important. We call ourselves Christians. We're supposed to study eschatology, the study of the end days. Jesus even said, the Bible says that there is a blessing on the people who read the book of Revelation. It's the only book in the Bible that pronounces a blessing over people who read it. Well, it gets a lot of its keys of the symbolism from right here in Daniel. This is a book of eschatology, the end times. Let's learn so we can study, show ourselves approved, know what is to come so we can be prepared, and so that we can prepare others for what is to come. Even those who are left behind, at least they will have known and seen and know what to expect, and maybe they can still somehow survive and win and not take the mark and love God and be able to be with us at the end of days. It is very important, regardless of what position that we're in, that we study eschatology so that we can understand what's to come and we can help somebody else. I hope you've been blessed. Look for Daniel chapter 8 next so that we can get a little bit deeper into where the Antichrist is coming from and what to expect concerning him. God bless.